Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to The Pursuit. Man, I am so excited about our guest and speaker today, an episode today, the one and only Steve Siebold. Many of you, almost all of you, I know you know of Steve. I know most of you guys have his book. I've certainly talked about a lot on our show. And it's, when I started the podcast, I made a list of my dream guests, and Steve was right at the top of the list. So I'm so excited to have you here today, Steve. For those of you that don't know Steve, let me give you a little bit of background. I mean, we're going to hear from, I think, the greatest expert in the world on mental toughness and thinking, one of anyways. It's incredible. Author of 12 books. I know last year in 2020, I think your guys' new book, How Money Works, was #1 seller in personal finance. And literally, Steve's been on every major television network all across North America. I mean, I don't know how many interviews you've done, probably in the thousands, but we are hearing from one of the world's best experts when it comes to this stuff. So Steve, thank you so much for the time today.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
I want to talk to you about, I want to jump into a bit about your story for people that maybe aren't familiar with it. How did you get started on this whole journey of mental toughness, which then led to How Rich People Think and so much more? But tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, basically, I grew up training to be a professional tennis player since I was 6 years old. So I traveled around the world as a young kid, starting at 6 and all the way through 18. Then I played Division I college tennis, and I went pro for 2 years. And along the way, I basically grew up with a lot of rich kids. I was not a rich kid. I was from Chicago, suburb in Chicago, kind of a middle-class suburb. But I grew up with a lot of rich kids, and I kind of got intrigued about their life and their lifestyle. And, you go stay over at their house somewhere if you're playing a tournament out of town, and they have tennis courts in their backyards and big pools. And that's kind of cool. So along the way of my tennis journey, in 1984, I was a sophomore in college, and I started interviewing self-made millionaires. And I met one, and I had a chance. I thought, if I'm ever going to be rich like one of these people these parents of these kids I grew up with, I better learn how they do it. And I wasn't learning it in school. I was kind of frustrated about that in college. Mm-hmm. So I started interviewing these millionaires, and it just continued, and it continues to this day. It's been since 1984. So that's right now 37 years and about 1,325 or something like that interviews. Wow. And so that's where How Rich People Think came. And people ask about that all the time. How'd you go from mental toughness to How Rich People Think? It's because I did all these interviews because I wanted to be one of them. And I learned a lot about the way they think and way they process, thoughts about money and thinking about money and strategy and that type of thing. So that's how that whole thing came about. It was totally unintentional. Crazy.
That's incredible. And when we'll talk about How Rich People Think for a little bit, I know that the book is amazing. Everybody, if you don't have the book, you got to get the book. It's one of my all-time favorites. What would you say, because there's so many great resources in there, but what are the primary differences between maybe average people and How Rich People Think? I know there's many of them, but what would you say the primary ones are?
Yeah, actually, I just completed yesterday, believe it or not, the video course for the book, which we've been asked to do.
Oh, really?
About 10, 11 years, people have been saying, can you tell the stories behind the book of all these interviews, all these millionaires and billionaires? And I just never really had time to do it because I've been on the road my whole life pretty much. Right. And so we just finished this video course. It's pretty cool. The first part of the video course, it's about 9.5 hours long or something like that. But anyway, it's the primary thing I think is just in general is that the self-made millionaires have a healthy relationship with money. It all starts, in my mind, it all kind of starts with that. They see money through the eyes of opportunity and freedom and, possibility and dreams. Whereas most of us are programmed, in childhood to think money, it's a necessary evil and, it's not a good thing. And rich people are crooks and all these negative connotations to money. So why would, I ask in the book, why would anyone, go after something they've been pre-programmed to disdain? And so people deny that money's important and all that. And it's absolutely one of the most important things in life, even though it's not the most important thing. It's certainly one of them. Absolutely. But if I keep denying it's important, why would I ever try to attain it?
Yeah. That's it's so true. And I think it's so interesting how when we're not aware of that, of how much we may have been programmed or thinking that, of course, then we're always dumbfounded. Why am I not getting the success I want? Which actually brings me, a little bit, I want to talk about this one here, little expanded ideas on this. In 177 Mental Toughness Secrets, you talk about the idea of champions separating truth from fact. Can you expand on that idea and maybe even how that would apply in this scenario?
Yeah, boy, that's a good timing on that question. Yeah. With all the craziness, especially in the States here, all this craziness, all these conspiracy theories and people literally just making stuff up and then millions of people believe it overnight.
Right.
I mean, it's just, I just don't even know what to think anymore about that. So yeah, we just make the separation between truth and fact. We say that fact is objective reality. This happened. It's documented.
Right.
It actually happened. And truth is, when people say, well, I'm speaking my truth or I'm living my truth. Well, that's their version of the truth. It's not actually objective reality. It's subjective reality by definition. So the truth is more of an emotional, wishful thinking kind of a thing. Whereas in this particular example, and fact is objective reality.
And for those that, I love how you talk about truth because it's subjective and that you can almost create your own truth, and how champions put that into their favor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly. Yeah. And in some ways it can be great. I mean, if we're talking about conspiracy theories and people making stuff up, well, then it's obviously negative. But yeah, in terms of the way the reason I wrote that in that book was because it's for the positive connotation, as you're mentioning, that people can say, hey, you know what? I'm a champion and I'm a comeback artist and I'm going to make it. And I always do what I say with it. I'm going to do. Even if I'm making that up and I have never done what I said I'm going to do, and I've never been a champion, I can talk myself into it. And that doesn't hurt anyone else. That just propels me forward as a performer. And I'm literally programming myself, even though, factually speaking, these things aren't true, but I'm programming myself into it. And that's why I wrote it in the book. Of course, you can take it on the negative side, which we've seen a lot of now in society. But in terms of performance, yeah, it's a powerful tool.
Yeah. And I think that's so much, everybody. I mean, the story you're telling yourself, you're always telling yourself a story. You're always telling yourself some kind of truth. The question is it serving us to become the best version of ourselves? Are we achieving what we want through that story? And then, like Steve's talking about, if you can alter it to create more empowering stories and more empowering beliefs, that's where the magic is. And I'm curious too, I obviously wrote in the book, so I know it's the case. After all these years of studying all these wealthy and successful people, nothing ends up in that book if it wasn't a part of that. And I think sometimes people think that, well, people that are successful, somehow they were always that way, or they were born into it, or whatever it might be. Where I think the reality is that maybe a few of them were, but most of them were people that understood this idea and took control of their programming. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the most common questions I've gotten in the press over the last, especially 15 years where I'm doing, I've done thousands of interviews all over the world. As you mentioned, it's just part of our business model. People say, well, the reporters will say, this is the most common question. I'll say, okay, what's the most common theme that these self-made millionaires and billionaires talked with you about during these interviews? What's the thing they talk about the most? And it's overwhelming one thing. And they're always surprised: failure. Their story is a story of failure. For 95% of it, for most of these people, it's how they failed in the beginning and how they doubted themselves, and they lost money and they went bankrupt. They got divorced and no one believed them, and they failed over and over. And then boom, they hit a home run and everyone goes, genius. Guy's a genius. Woman's a genius. I mean, it's everything they touch turns to gold, and they laugh about it. Because typically everything they touched, failed until the home run. And now everyone forgets that, Babe Ruth was the strikeout king as well as the home run king.
Right.
But people forget about the strikeouts. They just see the home runs, which is a good thing in a way. But that's what they talk about, is they basically failed their way to success.
Why do you think at the middle class level, so many people are trying to avoid failure?
I think failure's been demonized. It's been put down as you're if you fail, you're a loser. You fail, you're somehow not as smart as someone else, or you don't work as hard, or you just don't have it. You don't have the it factor, whatever. You can use all these different ways to define it. So I think we're programmed with that. From the time we're kids, and then we go out, we strike out on our own. We're all excited. We're going to be an entrepreneur, let's say, or we're going to try something that's sort of out of the norm. And people say, don't do it. Don't do it. That's not the way to do it. You're playing it. You're playing it too loose. You're taking too many chances. Then we fail and we go, oh, and everyone says, I told you so. You should have never done that. We all told you so. I don't know why you didn't listen to us. And then they go, okay, you're right. And then we shrivel up and we go back to life in the masses and never to be heard from again.
Yeah. It's so interesting because that whole idea of just a lot of the people around, especially if we grow up in kind of more of a middle class environment, well, of course they have middle class beliefs, right? Middle class thinking, and that idea of I told you so, which actually brings me to one of my questions. I've heard you talk about many, many times, just this idea of the most debilitating addiction in the world is the approval addiction. And can you expand on that? And then not only expanding on it, but then can we talk about a couple of tips? How do I start to break that cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I've done whole seminar tours, literally 40 city tours on approval addiction around the world. And because it's such a big deal, because approval addiction, I mean, it's in our DNA. I mean, it's probably been passed down through evolution, I suppose, over at least a couple 100,000 years, where if you didn't get the approval of, the bigger people, the more powerful people, the tribe, you starved to death. I mean, you died. When you're a kid, you need approval of your parents and your teachers and your coaches and your ministers and your, Boy Scout leaders or whatever, people of influence or power. And if you don't get their approval, if you don't do what they want, then you suffer for it. So we learn to become addicted to approval because it works for us. And then it really, well, what I found during the research over these years, Ben, is that it really does work actually for most people until they strike out on their own. And they go outside of the norm where people go, oh, you really shouldn't do that. Like becoming an entrepreneur is probably one of the best examples, if not the best example. They become an entrepreneur and then they fail. And then people say, well, I told you so, same kind of thing. And then they literally feel it in their body. They feel it in everything. They feel bad about themselves. They feel stupid. And so they shrivel up. And so now it's a case of, as long as you approve of the people around me I care about, and maybe even strangers, as long as you approve of what I'm doing, I'm going to be okay. But if you don't, I can't really afford psychologically, emotionally to go there. And I think that's why most entrepreneurs fail, because they don't realize they're approval addicts before they enter a business. And if you don't realize that, because most of us are, and if you don't realize that, then you're bound to, if you do fail, unless you succeed right off the bat, which few people do, you're probably going to struggle with that. And you're probably going to quit and go back and get a job and just sort of disappear into the masses.
So all that being said, so let's say, okay, I want to break free of that. I realize I have it. What are some practical tips on how do I get out of that approval addiction?
Oh, it's funny. This goes back to the 1940s. A South African psychiatrist was working with people with phobias, let's say like a snake phobia, and he realized that the secret to overcoming a phobia is to basically expose the person to the phobia. Let's say it's called a snake. He would start out, he was the foremost researcher in this area. He would start out showing people a picture of a snake. And people would literally freak out because there were some people, and it was really a severe homophobia. They would freak out just at the picture. And then he would show them a snake 20 feet away, a real snake in a cage, and they would freak out again, but not as much because he kept showing it to them over and over. And finally, by the end of the 6 months or whatever it was, based on the severity of the phobia, it would be a situation where they were holding the snake a lot of times in their hand and saying, it's just a snake. It's not a big deal. They're really pretty harmless if they're not poisonous, and they would not be addicted to it. And so what he said, it's a matter of systematic desensitization is what he called it, or systematically desensitizing emotionally to the event or the phobia, whatever it is. And it turns out that with approval addiction, it's the exact same thing. So it's not the easy answer, because you can't just read a book, I don't think, and overcome it. You have to go through the gauntlet. You have to say, you know what, I realize I'm an addict. Yeah. And what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to be disapproved of, and I'm going to have to take the pain, feel the pain, accept it, and say, I'm an addict. That's why I feel bad when you reject me. And when you say I shouldn't have done it and you just disapprove of me in general, I feel it. But if I keep going through it and I keep moving forward, eventually when you disapprove of me, I won't feel it. There will be no emotional consequence to your disapproval of me. And that's when you've gone through you've broken the addiction.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I remember you talking about the concept of champions over time. They learn to kind of link the equation of rejection or this, not getting approval to success in a way.
Yeah, it's almost a badge of honor, because it's just, you think of all if you've built businesses, we've been building businesses for 35 years and some successful and some unsuccessful and more unsuccessful than successful, like typical serial entrepreneurs do. You start something up, you think it's a great idea, you put a bunch of money in, you get investors sometimes, whatever you do. And all of a sudden you wake up one day and go, oh shoot, I blew that one. My last one about 5 years ago, I lost $4 million. I invested $8 million and I came back with 4. And I'm a co-author of a book called How Money Works, Ben. That's not the right way to do it. Something's wrong with that scenario. You're supposed to come out with more money, I think, than less. But, I just mistimed the market. I made a couple of mistakes and I didn't really realize it till about 2 years in. I realized I'm going to lose the other $4 million if I don't if I don't close up shop. So I divested, got rid of I had 20 something employees, got rid of all the employees and shut the thing down before I lost any more money and cut my losses. And I think that, and there were people that criticized that, but, once you have some successes, then people usually don't say too much. But when I failed at businesses in the past, you talk to people when I'd fail at some business I started up years ago, and then I'd be in an interview and I feel terrible about it because I was an approval addict like everybody, of course. And I do an interview with a self-made millionaire, and I tell them a story, and I'd say, oh yeah. They say, how's it going? I got known pretty well in those circles. And I'd say, well, I lost, I invested $86,000 or whatever it was. And I lost it all because I did this, and they'd laugh. And I'd say, I'm losing sleep over it.
Devastated. Yeah.
And they're laughing. They go, why do you think that's such a big deal? And they go, well, it's a lot of money. They go, well, yeah, relatively it's a lot of money, but that's the game. You're an entrepreneur. We've all lost lots of money, more than that, less than that, whatever. It's all the same. You've got to get used to this because that's the game you're in. You're probably going to have big wins and big losses and somewhere in between, but you're going to have to they would laugh at almost every person laugh. And I'm losing sleep over it, and they're laughing, and I'm thinking, what am I missing? Why are they laughing and I'm not? Because I'm saying, oh, my family's doubting me, and my friends are doubting me, and people don't, and they're going, yeah, welcome to the club. That's the entrepreneur club. Welcome to the club. You got to get used to all that, or you're never going to make it. And I finally started getting it, starting realizing that it was me. I was the problem. And that really helped a lot. And that doesn't mean it's not painful when you lose, of course, or when you fail, but you realize it's almost a badge of honor. You're in a very elite club once you failed at a business. It's kind of funny, but it's not fun, but it is, that's kind of the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so unique. I mean, the business we're in, but I mean, so many people that start, they're often at times their friends and family are doubting them. Right. Oh, are you a millionaire yet? Did you make your first million? And all the criticism that comes along with it. And I think at times people think, I know in recruiting and training people, that often people think, oh, this is happening to me, right? This is somehow unique to me. But you just described it so well that's the entrepreneurial journey. I mean, it really is where in the beginning, I think probably most people may not believe in you. And then it becomes breaking through that cycle of the approval addiction and everything we've talked about.
Oh, yeah. I remember Bezos back in the 90s. Jeff Bezos, of course, now is the richest person in the world currently. And even he got divorced, and he's still the richest guy in the world, which is pretty crazy. But he just, went up in space the other day, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But I remember people laughing at Jeff Bezos in the millionaire kind of self-made millionaire, billionaire world. And I was in the heart of that whole thing in the 90s because I was really interviewing a lot of people. And Bezos was like a standing joke, not just for the public, but what he was proposing with Amazon when he started Amazon and some of the other things he was doing. People were laughing at him saying, he's losing money like crazy and everything. And he just kept going along. And then of course he creates Amazon, which is I think one of the greatest companies ever. Yeah. And now people are no longer laughing so much. And that's I think once you hit the home run, if people are listening to this, and they're thinking, well, yeah, that's great for you guys. You're down the road, whatever. But until you hit the home run, they're going to doubt you. But once you hit one home run, you'd think they'd come back and say, I was wrong and you were right. Yeah. Good luck with that. I didn't experience that. Everyone just shuts up and stops talking. I have relatives. I mean, that just would that were critical and whatever. And I heard through the little grapevine, back in the day before you do something decent size, a good win, that they would be saying things. Now, nobody ever, I'll go to a family function. No one even mentions anything, like nothing has said, no congratulations, nothing. Just, it's like you don't exist. It's like you're invisible. So they're not going to probably give it to you. Like, I was wrong and you were right. But they'll stop doubting you because you've hit the home run, and almost nobody does that in the society.
It's so true. I remember my biggest critic in the beginning gave me the hardest time when I started a business. And then we parted ways, hadn't talked to him, and saw him 7 years later. And I was doing, somewhat well in business. And we ended up at a poker tournament, saw him there, and he asked how things were going. And I told him the truth. And he goes, oh man, that's awesome. I always knew you were going to do it.
Yeah, you get some of those too. Yeah, right. It's like, really? I don't remember that.
Yeah. But you know what, though? I think that for a lot of people too, sometimes you can turn that when others may be doubting or others may be criticized, whatever it might be. So I think some champions turn that into fuel for, I'm going to make this happen.
Oh yeah. No question about it. Yeah. I had a cousin who inherited a bunch of money and never worked a day in his life, inherited millions and millions of dollars from one of my uncles. And one time I was starting my first business right after college. And I really thought it was going to be big. It didn't turn out to be big, but I was in the middle of the startup and I was excited. And I was working at a gas station, back when you pumped gas, this is a long time ago. I was working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And so it's a little bit dangerous too to work the night shift back then. And I was pumping gas, and I remember seeing him. He inherited all this money. He was older than me, about 20 years older. And he said, "Hey, Steve, great job. I hear you're pumping gas for a living. Glad that college education really paid off for you." And I'll never forget. I remember exactly where it was. This is 30 plus years ago. And I remember exactly how I felt. And I carried that with me and fueled me. No pun intended, but the gas. But,
yeah,
I feel it kind of fueled me. And I said something to him once we started to break through and have some success. I said something to him about 15 years later, and he had no recollection of saying that at all. He said it probably as a joke, and he's being stupid. And he walked away. He was going to his car, I remember, at his office, and he drove away and probably never thought twice about it. But it stuck with me, and it sticks to me to this day. But it fueled me because I thought, okay, I'll wait. Let's give it some time. You inherited your money. I'm out there on the street. Working for it. Let's see what happens. And things, I won't go into the detail because it's a family member, but it's just suffice it to say things turned around completely. He went to the bottom and I went higher. And so it was at least a good, I didn't want him to suffer, but it was a good feeling to beat to beat that a little bit. So
100%. And for everybody listening, if you think about that, is use that, right? You can use those moments. So if you have people in your life that are maybe like that cousin for Steve, hey, that's okay. We all do. Use it for fuel, use it to help you get to the level you need to. And yeah, it's good. I want to hear you talk about this idea, because I love, one of my favorite chapters in the book is where you talk about the 5 levels of mental toughness and moving from competing to creating. And I think it's just such a beautiful concept. Can you expand a bit on that idea for everyone?
Yeah, basically, we took it sort of over after an Abraham Maslow kind of hierarchy, kind of a thing. So basically, it just starts out with people playing not to lose, which is what most people do. They do it in sports. In sports, that's a very common phrase, saying you're playing not to lose. You're trying to protect yourself. You're trying to call it close, but you're not really trying to win. You're not taking enough risk to try to win. I think that, most people in society, whether it's Canada or the US or anywhere in the free world, people are kind of trained and programmed in school and by parents. And, they're trying to protect us. I mean, from pain, obviously, but we're playing not to lose. We're trying to play defense all the time and not suffer too much pain. And that's the goal of our life. So the old joke is, you get to heaven and St. Peter says, "Congratulations, you've arrived safely at death." I'm just like, wow, I made it. This is fantastic. And so then it goes all the way up to really playing. There's different levels, but playing to compete, is one of the ones. What I found is a lot of people think that's the highest level. And most psychologists, performance psychologists, disagree and say competition is not the highest level because it's ego-based, especially in business.
Right.
Because what you do in your business is completely differently than what I do, even if we're in the same business. Just because you approach it a different way, you might have way more talent than me, way more education, you might be just smarter than me. And then I've got whatever I've got. So it's really not even a level playing field in terms of competitiveness. And so competition is almost just an ego trip, just for people to say, well, I'm better than you because I scored higher, or I made more money, or I, live in a bigger house or a small, whatever it is. Yeah. And it's kind of lower level. So they say the highest level in performance psychology is playing to create, where you say, Ben, whatever you have, man, I just wish the best for you. And I wish the best for me and everybody else. I'm just trying to use what I have, whatever resources I have, whatever education, intelligence, et cetera, to create what I can create. And you might be way better, smarter, whatever. And I'm glad for you about that. But here's what I can do. So I'm just kind of in a business by myself where I'm trying to create my own future and do what I'm capable of doing, even if it's not anywhere near what you're capable of doing. This is the best I can do. And I'm creating my own future instead of competing with you and everyone else.
Yeah, I think it's so great because I know I had a season in my life where competition was a big part of it. And then realizing, and it was a lot through studying your work, but just realizing, well, why does it matter what somebody else is doing or not doing? How does that actually affect my life in any way? And it's such an interesting concept. I want to hear your thoughts. I don't know the answer to this. Do you find most people have to kind of grow and evolve to that level? Do they go through the different stages, do you find, or can you just jump to that highest level of thought?
I think you can. I don't think most of us do. I think because we're so, especially the States is a funny place, just traveling around the world for so long, for so many years. I find that even Canada, even though as close as we are, and in so many ways, we're so close. Mm-hmm. And of course, physically close as well, logistically. But mm-hmm. I think the U.S. is sort of an anomaly in terms of we're so competitive and we're so success, all around the world, not so much in Canada, but all over the world, they call us, you're success crazy. The U.S. is success crazy. And I think there's probably some validity to that. Even in Canada, even when I work in Canada and I do book signings and stuff, I find that the society is quite different. I think you guys are more like, in my opinion, like the UK, more low key. You guys are less ego driven. This is just my opinion, but right. Less ego driven. Of course, I'm stereotyping, but I think there's some validity to it where we've got this thing about, well, we're the greatest country in the world and we're this and we're that. Well, yeah, maybe in some ways we are, we're a very strong country in some ways. In other ways, we're not a strong country. We suck in some ways. And Canada is a better country in some ways. And, and the UK and all different kind of, free world countries. But I think that at the end of the day, I think that if you come from not ego, but from a spirit-based consciousness, not like in the context of religion, although that if people are religious, they could connect it, but just spirit in the sense of you're coming from your own human spirit and you're saying, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to wish you the best and I'm going to do the best I can. I hope for the best for everybody, but I'm not really in a competition with you. I'm in a competition really with me just to see if I can be better today than I was yesterday. And so I don't think most people reach it, but yes, to your question, I think people can make that leap. I was certainly in competitive mode for a long time being an athlete because everything's based on winning and losing. Of course. And then, you wake up. I'll tell you the exact story. I remember I was playing a guy in Florida and he was 4 or 5 years younger than me. And I was on the pro tour and I was ranked about 500 in the world, my best day. And this guy was coming up. He was ranked 618 in the world. And I thought, well, he can't be that good because I'm not that good and I'm 500. And I played him and I just couldn't believe how talented he was. He was just so gifted. I'd never seen anybody hit a tennis ball like that, even though I was ranked ahead of him at that time. This is back in the 80s. And it was Andre Agassi. Oh. Who became, this great star. And I was on his coaching team after that a couple of years ago, or a couple of years after. But, my point is that I realized, I remember training with Agassi one day, we were doing this drill, serve and volley drill, they call it back in the day. And I said, I don't understand how you can see the ball so soon. You're returning 130 mile an hour serve from this guy we used to train with named Tim Mayotte, who was one of the biggest servers in the world at that time. Hit 130 mile an hour serve a lot of times. And Agassi was taking an 8-foot backswing. And it was just him, the three of us doing this drill. And I'm just blocking the ball, trying to just seed the ball in time to just get it back over the net before Matt put it away on us. And Agassi's taking an 8-foot backswing. So how do you see it so early? He goes, Steve, you got to focus. It's in your head. I'm like, no, it's not. You see that ball before I do. That's the difference. Yeah. And I mean, and he realized that eventually. He was probably the best serve returner in the world in the history of the game, or one of them, because he saw it early. My point is, Ben, is that it's a talent. I mean, he was born with that. He didn't develop that. He was born with that. I can do that my whole life and never even come close to what he was doing. And most people couldn't, even pro players, but it's a talent. So how do I compete with someone that was born with a talent I clearly don't have? It makes no logical sense. To competition, in a lot of ways, makes no logical sense for the high performing, the person that really wants to go forward, especially in business. Comparing yourself to other people can be a real albatross in business.
Yeah. That's a great story, by the way. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's so much it is. And I think that other thing I've noticed too is that, and I want to hear your thoughts on this idea too, is that generally I find if you're stuck in maybe that playing to compete, it's pretty tough to be really happy in your life if you're always comparing. Do you agree on that concept?
Yeah, because you probably aren't looking at the people that you're beating. You're probably looking at the people who are beating you, right? It's like giving a speech, right? You're a presentation of any kind. You're in the audience. Everyone's kind of looking at like they like what you're doing, but there's one person that's fallen asleep. There's always one. They're there purposely. If there's a God anywhere out there, I'm not sure there is, but if there is, he's putting him in that room just to do this to you. I think. and they're just falling asleep, or they're looking at you like, what are you talking about?
Arms
You're a
crossed.
moron, exactly. And that's the one you focus on. You're thinking, I'm going to get that guy no matter what, I'm going to get him to pay attention and like what I'm saying. And I think that's the problem is, we look at the people are beating us and you think, and it's easy to do. I still do it too. You look at people and go, how are they so far ahead of me, or making more money, or getting more this or that, whatever it is. I mean, are they that much smarter? And suddenly you feel worse afterwards than you did before. And it's no good because you have no idea what the circumstances are, nor do they really matter at the end of the day. It's easy. I mean, it's easy to say and hard to do. I get it. And again, I still fall into the trap too, but boy, it's a formula for unhappiness, because no matter how successful you are, or how rich you are, or how good looking you are, or how whatever you are, there's always someone either better or right behind you that will be better tomorrow. So you can't win, at the end of the day with that kind of philosophy.
Yeah. And I think that it plays into that idea of just kind of scarcity and lack, and a lot of times versus the idea of love and abundance that you talk so much about. It's just awesome. Can you talk a bit about, I love this book. Again, if you don't have the book, you got to get the book. This is literally, I don't know how many books I've read at this stage of my life. Got to be in thousands now. And this, anytime someone asks me, what are the top 3 books you'd recommend? It's always in that list. I mean, it's such a great resource. I'm a big fan, studied lots under Bob Proctor. I know he's a great friend of yours, and you had worked with him and mentored with him for a long time. And I know he's talked about this idea, but I want to hear your spin on, and I know you talk about in the book, but the idea of using our imagination and how the world class is constantly using their imagination. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, Bob Proctor is one of the greats of all time. I mean, he's been a mentor of mine for close to 30 years now, and a great friend. We traveled all over the world, giving speeches together, and doing business. We did tons of business together, and just he's one of the greats, no question about that. Yeah, and he loves to talk about imagination, and I'm pretty sure I don't know anyone that talks about it better than Bob. But I think that if you can't imagine the future that you want to create, that you're probably not going to get there. I think you have to see it before. I mean, Bob used to talk to me about that all the time when I was becoming a professional speaker. We were traveling. My business partner was a gentleman named Bill Gove, who was also Bob Proctor's mentor in speaking. And that's how I met Bob many years ago. And Bob so many times, would say, we're going out. We literally were speaking at one point together for about 3 years in the 90s. We were speaking, me and Bill Gove and Bob Proctor were speaking to, between 5,000 and 10,000 people a week. It was just Europe, Australia, Scandinavia, of course, Canada, with Air Canada Center in Toronto. I don't know how many times we worked Air Canada with Bob, but lots of times. And, he's just the best. And he would say, is this what you imagined? I mean, what's the future? I mean, he's always to this day. I mean, I talked to him a couple of weeks ago when it was during his birthday. He just turned 87, I think it was, on July 5th. And so he's doing great. He's like he's 18. He's got so much energy. But I think that he makes that point really well, that you have to see it before, and you have to believe it's possible. And everyone else, you tell people about your vision and your imagination, and they think you're crazy. And maybe you are to some point, but you're not going to get there or have a chance of getting there until you Bob, I think until you can see it. And I think what Bob says, if you can tell me if you can, what did he say? What does he say? I should know this stuff. If you can hold it in your hand, you can.
If you can see it in your mind, you can hold it in your hand.
That's the one. I should know that. I've been here. He's been saying that to me for 30 years. I should know it. Yeah. I got some great Proctor stories for you for another time, but just backstage stuff that nobody knows. They're just great stories.
Oh man, would love to hear those.
Well, he had his 80th birthday at the Bellagio. They threw a birthday party for him, and there were about 100 of us there. This is, I guess 7 years ago at the Bellagio in Vegas. And I told some stories, some stories no one's ever heard before, except just between me and Bob and Bill Gove, and just great stuff. But suffice it to say, everyone listening to this should study Bob Proctor, because he's just the best. He really is. Incredible. I want to. I got 2 young kids. They're 5 and 3. I know a lot of our listeners have kids. I want to hear your thoughts on all these years of studying all these world-class people. Of course, you've seen them raise their kids and what's happened with them, and learn tips. Give us some of the tips on twofold. I want to hear some tips on building mental toughness in our kids, but also some tips on helping them think properly, helping them, how rich people think. How do we help raise rich kids? Yeah, they seem to go two ways. Now, I don't have kids, so I'm certainly not a child rearing expert of any shape or form. So keep that in mind, that I'm a total amateur speaking here out loud. So I probably don't even have the right to say it. But the one thing I have had some experience with is just observing the children of these self-made millionaires and billionaires I've interviewed over the years. And it seems like they go one or two ways extreme. They either rebel against everything and they go rogue against everything that the person's trying to, program them positively to do, or they really dive into it and say, this is my hero. I'm going to do this stuff. And when they do, of course, they're hard to beat. I mean, I've literally seen some of these kids without funding from their parents become millionaires in their 20s. I mean, I give you lots of examples, and I've also seen some of them jump off bridges and become drug addicts and all that. And I don't know what the difference is in parenting, because again, I'm unqualified to answer the question. I'm not sure what happens there if they can control it or not. But I would say, I would start out, if I was a parent, and I'm not, but if I was, what I would do is I would start out with approval addiction. I would prepare them. I was on Fox News in Chicago yesterday, and they asked a similar question about raising kids in terms of money and the whole context. And I said, what I would do is I would teach them that the world is a rough place. Give it to them straight. Tell them what it is. The world is tough. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to have to accept criticism, which means you can't be addicted to the approval of other people. Listen to what they have to say and thank them for their criticism or their advice or whatever, and then go on, evaluate it, and then move forward. But don't let it stop you if you disagree with it. And realize that there are people out there that just don't want you to win. That's just, the world is a tough place. I think that's one of the things that self-made millionaires do with their kids. I wrote a book called Secrets Self-Made Millionaires Teach Their Kids a couple of years ago in 2018. Okay. And it made the cover of Money Magazine, and it made the book, basically. Money Magazine is out of business now, but it made the cover. And basically what I talked about with this, one of the things I talked about in that book was that they prepare, I think it's the first chapter, if I'm not mistaken, they prepare their kids to say, look, the world is a beautiful place and it's a brutal place. It's both. It's kind of a dichotomy, but that's what it is. It's terrible and it's wonderful. But you got to know both sides, I think, and they prepare their kids for what it really is, as opposed to what they wish it were. There's no fantasy thinking in their training for the most part that I observe. So I think one of the things is you're going to get criticized. That's what I was talking about on Fox in Chicago yesterday. You're going to get criticized, telling their kids this for almost everything you do, especially when you step out of the norm. They're going to come at you, and they're going to come at you hard. So you better be ready for it, and you better be tough enough. Or if you're not, you're going to have to go back and stand in line with the masses. And if you're okay with that, that's fine. You can be happy doing that. That's not a problem. But if you want to stake your own claim, you're going to have to realize the way it is, and you're going to have to be tough enough to take it.
That's so good. Yeah, I've often wondered, obviously we're all doing the best we can, but how can I help prepare them in the best way I can and I like that, the reality of life, right? And preparing them for that. And I think,
I'll tell you, just as a recommendation, that we put a workbook together. I did this purposely just as a legacy thing for, again, I'm not a parent, but I thought if I was a parent, it'd be really cool to have like a workbook with with that Secret Self-Made Millionaires Teach Your Kids book. What most people do around the world with that book, when they tell me in book signings, is because I did a whole tour for it after I wrote the book. They download the workbook. I forget the address, but it's in like the front page of the book or whatever. It's a free download. You download the workbook, and then they fill the workbook out with their kids as they're reading them the book and you read it together with them is the idea. I tell you, and again, if I was smart enough to write all those things in that book, that'd be great. But I got it from all these millionaires. I mean, I just took what they told me and put it in a book, right. But the stuff in that book, some of the stuff I've read, but a lot of the things that people would be kind of shocked that these millionaires teach their kids that most people don't ever teach their kids. And it's more about, I think, Ben, what it really is it's grounded more, again, in objective reality. They're telling them, here's the way it really is all the way around. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. I'm not telling them they're taking away Santa Claus. I'm just telling you, in general, when it comes to real important things, they're saying, here's the way it really is out there. I want you to be prepared. So when you go out there by yourself and there's no one to protect you, you're not going to get killed. You're going to say, Dad told me this, Mom told me this. They told me it would be this way, and they were right. And so people fill the workbook out. So I encourage people, if they read that book, get the workbook and fill it out. People do it all over the world. I get these stories all the time. It's pretty cool.
That is so cool. I'm excited to get that. I'm looking forward to that. That's awesome.
I wish I'd have had that as a kid, and someone would have told me all these things I had, like all of us have to learn on the, on the street. It's kind of learning sex. No one says, here's exactly what it is and what it's not and what to avoid. Don't say this, don't do this. You sort of learn it from your friends that don't know anything either. And you stumble into it.
Yeah.
And this is obviously much more important than that. And they don't teach us this stuff.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, Steve's done all this work, all these interviews, all the time he spent, time, energy, and money into this stuff, that literally we can take this. I think is one of the most amazing things. Another favorite chapter is number 177. School's never out for the great ones is one of my favorites. But this idea of, okay, you spent all this time interviewing all these people. We can take what they've done, learn it, and apply it. Right. So perhaps as you're listening, you're thinking, well, I'm not wealthy right now. How can I teach my kids how to be wealthy? Well, you can start teaching some of these ideas and borrow them from people that were, right, and help prepare them.
Yeah, you're totally right, Ben. One of the people I interviewed many years ago was a billionaire named Walter Haley. And he was about 5'1", little short guy, built multi-million-dollar businesses in the 1950s and 60s. He was in the Lyndon Johnson administration in the States, at the White House. Just a guy that was just born with so much talent. It was ridiculous. And he lived in San Antonio, Texas, in the Hill Country. And after I interviewed him years later, when I became a speaker, he used to hire me to speak, and he'd pick me up in a Rolls-Royce limousine. I've never seen one before since. A Rolls-Royce limousine at the San Antonio airport. And then he'd be in the back of the car. Usually they pick you up, if you're speaking, they pick you up in something, but sometimes a limo. And you'd be in the back and there's a driver. Well, he would sit in the back with me and ride about 45 minutes to an hour to the Hill Country, and he would coach me. And you're getting coached by a multi-billionaire. And the thing that he's passed away since, but that he used to say to me so many times over the many years he hired me to speak on these trips we would take. He'd say, Stevie, he called me Stevie. Stevie, here's the secret to becoming a billionaire, or any success you want to have that's big. You got to copy genius. He says, you'll never live long enough to figure it all out. And it's stupid to try. He goes, just copy genius, find genius and copy it. He said, that's how I became a multimillionaire when I was 23 years old. He sold his first company to Kmart when he was 23 years old for $74 million. Like in the 1960s.
Way. Wow.
Yeah, when it was probably worth 500 million, back in those days.
Wow.
He said, I just copied genius. He said, that's all I ever did. And he said, he goes, I'm not a genius. He was, but he'd say he wasn't. Then he'd say, but I copied people who were much smarter and I did what they did. And people say, gee, you must be, some kind of a marketing guru. And he said, no, I just copied genius.
What a tip right there. Hey. Wow.
Yeah. He was a cool guy.
I got another question for you. And then, so this will probably be the last one on this idea, but I want to hear from you. You started out interviewing these people, you learned all this stuff, turned it into the great work that it's become. And I guess I want to talk about, I was actually asking a friend of mine, I'm meeting with Steve today, what would you want to ask him? And I thought it was such a great question. And he said, of all the things you've studied, all the stuff, tell us a bit about maybe some of the top ones how you've applied this into your own life, and what were the differences of applying this in your life?
I think, probably the top thing was right off the bat was the first chapter of the 177 Mental Toughness Secrets book. Because people ask in book signing, you learn a lot about what people think about your books during book signings. And I've done, hundreds and hundreds, I don't know how many I've done, lots of book signings. Because you get to interact with people that like the books, or most of the time they like them because they're at your book signing. But sometimes you get criticism, but you learn a lot of what they take away. And people ask all the time, they'll say, well, I'm doing one in Los Angeles, matter of fact, next weekend for 500 people. And they'll say the same thing usually, even though they're brand new. They say, do the 177, Mental Toughness Secrets, did you put them in order? And the truth is I didn't, except the first one. And the first one is the great ones live in objective reality. It's objective reality. So you're seeing things again, like we talked about earlier, Ben, the way things really are, as opposed to the way I wish they were. I'm not living in a wishful thinking, fantasy, delusional world. And I think that most people do. I think most people do. Not that it's not a hit on their intelligence or their education. It's a hit on their inability to see things as they are, because they can be uncomfortable. Like, I've got to see things the way I am. I got to see myself as the way I am if I'm going to get better and be more successful. It's like being an athlete. You have to know what your weaknesses are as well as your strengths. And you can't say, well, I'm doing the best I can. Well, you might be, but you're still weak in this area. It's not a judgment. It's not an indictment. It's just a fact. And so I think that the objective reality part is not the most fun part, but you start to erase delusion and you start to live in a world of critical thinking. And it starts, I think, with us. And so I was interviewing these performers, and they're saying, look, Steve, why aren't you, they turned the tables on me, and they'd say, well, why aren't you more successful? Are you a millionaire yet? You're at whatever age I was at the time. I'd say, no, I'm making whatever I was making, $45,000 a year, or whatever I was making at the time. And they'd say, well, why is that? And they'd be interviewing me, which I thought was kind of funny. Yeah. And I'd say, well, I guess because I'm not really sure. And they'd say, well, you've got to look at, you've got to start looking at yourself the way you really are. What are your real strengths and what are your real weaknesses? Don't judge yourself. It's just objective reality. It is what it is. What are you good at? What are you not good at? Mm-hmm. And they pushed me pretty hard with that for a long time, to the point where I made it the first chapter in the book all those years later, after many interviews, hundreds of interviews with those guys. So that was the one that sticks out to me above anything else. It's a hard lesson, but once you start to get into a frame of critical thinking and objective reality, it changes the way you look at yourself and your business and everything else. You're living in the real world, as opposed to some made up fantasy that a lot of people inhabit because it's comfortable.
Thanks for sharing that. That is such a great one. And I think the way you said it is not in a judgmental way. And I think that's such an important lesson out of objective reality and critical thinking, is you're looking at your strengths and then you're looking at your weaknesses, not to sit there and feel bad, but to be real about, where do I need to grow? Where do I need to change? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, just to give you one more example, Ben, it's like just like a national example. It's like one of the things, again, like in the States, like I love the United States as a country. I think it's a great country in so many ways. And I'm glad to have lived here and everything. But, when people say, well, again, this is sort of this fantasy thinking, where people say, well, we're just the greatest country in the world, just across the board. Well, I would take exception with that and say, yeah, in some ways we are. But then I look at Canada and I say, you guys, I'm not saying it's an ideal system, because no system is, but you guys have a universal health care for your people. You're not putting people on the street like we are when they get old and they get sick and they're not rich. Well, that happens here all the time. We're evicting people right now. And I'm not saying I have an answer. I'm not smart enough to come up with an answer, but you guys, I think, are superior in that way. I know the system isn't perfect, like, just like in the UK with the health system, but in my opinion, it's better than our system. Now, if you're rich, it's not better. If you're rich, like, if I get sick, all I got to do is pick up my cell phone and call my doctor. He takes my, it's a VIP service. He takes my calls or whatever, because I'm paying him a ridiculous amount of money to do that. But if I don't have that money, like I didn't for a long time, then I'm just on my own. But if I live in Canada, or if I'm in the UK, even if I live in Costa Rica, there's a healthcare system in a poor country like Costa Rica. So my point of it is people they make blanket statements and say, well, I'm this or I'm that, or this country is this, or this business is this or that. I would say use critical thinking and break it down. There's a reason people say, how does Santa Claus, when you're a kid, how does Santa Claus get to all those houses in one single night, going down all those chimneys, coming up, going down? That's a lot of houses. Here's the answer. He doesn't. It's a fantasy. Okay. And I get fantasy is fun, but not when you're building a business. You can't live in a fantasy world. I think you've got to be in the real world. You got to use critical thinking, or you're going to get your lunch handed to you.
Yeah. I want to talk about this. I know we were talking this before the interview too. From what I understand, you're going to be launching Mental Toughness University to the public. And I know primarily this was something only available more on the corporate side of stuff, where companies would hire you to train their whole company and their staff and everything. Can you talk a bit about that, of what that's going to look like, and maybe give us some ideas on that?
Yeah, we did so much for 25 years. We've done proprietary programs for companies like Johnson & Johnson and GlaxoSmithKline and Microsoft and Procter & Gamble, et cetera. All these large companies with big sales teams, basically. And so we did customized programs like How to Coach Mental Toughness, where we train all thousands of managers in these companies over a period of years, of course, around the country, on how to coach mental toughness at the highest level. Like, like when we built the system, one of the systems for the Boston Celtics in the States here. So high level systems of $1 million teams and that type of thing. But we never did them for the public typically, because we were so busy with corporate, for one, but they were proprietary by nature. So we've stopped doing that effectively since the shutdown, and we don't really plan on going back. So now we're launching to the public. I'm doing one in Denver for our mutual buddy and great guy, Chris Felton. That's coming up. And I got one in Los Angeles next weekend. And I've got another one in Atlanta here coming up in a few weeks. So we're doing that around the country. I'm hoping to come to Edmonton. I love Greg Stranatka and Raja Dhaliwal and all those guys, Rial and Michelle and all those guys, and the Michaud brothers and all that. So we're launching it all over. We want to take it to this business, because I think mental toughness. You got so many, as you know, Ben, you got so many entrepreneurs in this company, in this business that have no experience in entrepreneurship, and they think they've got a job. And that's dangerous to walk into start a business when you think you're going to perform like an employee. It's like, it doesn't end at 5:00 is our lunch break. Then we work till midnight when you're building, of course, after you build in your reality show or your Raja or your, one of these big hitters, well then, then you're not working you just work when you want to work. That's a different thing. But when you're building, you're going to have to be mentally tough. You're going to have to be tough enough to hang in long enough to get good enough to make it work. And that takes mental toughness. So we're excited about bringing it out there. That's
awesome. Well, I'm excited about that too. People want to get more information from you. Where's the best place for them to connect with you more?
Yeah, they can Google me. I got a lot of sites out there. A Mental Toughness blog is one of our sites. And of course, with the new How Money Works book I wrote with Tom Matthews, howmoneyworks.com. People can check out the book and that type. It was the best-selling personal finance book in the United States in 2020. We sold about 500,000 copies. Wow. And so we're excited. So we're promoting. I'm in the media pretty much every day talking about that now since the last year or so. So amazing.
Well, thank you so much for the time. This was, like I said at the beginning, I mean, I'm not just saying that, but you're truly one of my dream guests to have on here, and did not disappoint anyway. It's been amazing. I'm sure you hear it lots, but I want you to know you made a massive difference in my life and from a distance. And it really has. And so many of these secrets in here, so many of these that I've been continually working on applying and getting better at, and how much they've shaped our life. And of course, in doing so, a lot of other people's lives too. So thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing. It really is amazing. Yeah.
I appreciate it, Ben. I appreciate you saying that. People say it all the time, maybe in book signs, they'll say, I know you hear this all the time. Believe me, as an author, you can't ever hear that enough. Because when you're writing, you write these books and you think, I wonder if anyone's ever going to read these books, especially before you get some, sales and popularity. And you think, I wonder if I'm going to spend a year doing something no one's ever going to read. So I appreciate you saying that it helped you. And I'm glad. Thank you.
Awesome. Everybody, hey, do us a favor. Make sure you share this episode. Tag me on it, tag Steve on it. I know on Instagram, I think it's Speaker Steve Siebold is his Instagram handle on there, but at whatever platform you're using, rank and review the podcast and really share this one. This is a phenomenal episode that you'll want to go back and listen to many times. If you don't have Steve's books, go and get his books, get involved in his work. I'm not saying it to say it. This is some of the best stuff you could ever invest your time, money, and energy into. Is Steve's work. It's just incredible. So thanks for being with us today. We'll see you all soon. Bye.